Thank you all for joining in. We have another very exciting conversation today as part of 200M's four-part event series, Demystifying Finance for Handmade Enterprises. This event is being conducted in partnership with the Social Investment Consultancy, which is our research partner for an ongoing research project where we are actually mapping the investment needs of craft-based enterprises in India. And Manasi and AB Chakravarty are people that we've been speaking to and have spoken to, and they've informed a lot of what we have been studying and the challenges around financing handmade enterprises. But before we get into the conversation and I hand it over to Bonnie, who is our host for this evening, let me give a very quick introduction about 200 Million Artisans. 200 Million Artisans is basically we started out as a COVID response platform back in 2020 to support artisan communities as well as craft-based enterprises. We pivoted to become an ecosystem enabler that bridges gaps in knowledge, resources, and partnerships for artisan producers as well as craft-based enterprises working in India's artisan economy. So that's a big part of our work is to build evidence for the sector. And that basically means doing research. Our first research project was focused on informality in the artisan economy and how that impacts the growth of enterprises. It is available as businessofhandmade.com. And we featured about 12 enterprises that have amazing business models and work with communities on ground. This research project, thereafter, we are focused on carrying out a very ambitious research project, which talks about, or which will be mapping the investment needs of over 500 craft enterprises in India. This research has been supported by C3 Grant Making, which is the Omidyar, Rockefeller, and MacArthur Foundations. And as part of the research, we've already spoken to about 70 stakeholders, including amazing visionaries like Chakra, Manasi, belonging to amazing organizations that are supporting craft-based enterprises. And all these insights, also supported by enterprises in the community, will help us put together Business of Handmade 2022, and which will be available for everybody to access as an open source flagship research property. So in whatever way you can support us to take forward this research, please do, and our team will be in touch. I'd like to also introduce Bonnie Chiu, who is the managing director of the Social Investment Consultancy, which is a consultancy based out of, that operates in 4 different places. It has offices in UK, India, Hong Kong, Ghana. TSIC has worked with close to 200 clients, including the Children's Investment Fund Foundation, British Council, and UNICEF. Bonnie has a very strong track record in impact investing, such as advising on the setup of the Women in Safe Homes Fund with Big Society Capital, co-founding the Diversity Forum for Inclusive Social Investment. She currently serves as the investment committee member of a £20 million flexible finance fund at Access Foundation for Social Investment. Her background is in social entrepreneurship, and she has been recognized as a Forbes 30 Under 30 social entrepreneur. Thank you everyone for joining in. Really a pleasure to have you here. I'm Priya Krishnamurthy. I'm the founder and CEO of 200 Million Artisans, and I'm going to hand it over to Bonnie Chiu, who is going to be leading this conversation. Thanks once again, Bonnie. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Priya. So hi, everyone. Really pleased to have a great panel waiting for us. And if you haven't already introduced yourself, do introduce yourself in the chat so we know who's in the room and that we can make sure we tailor the conversations accordingly. So today our conversation is the second in the series. So last week at the same time, we talked about debt and equity. So more traditional options for handmade enterprises and their limitations. And actually already last week, the term alternative finance has come up a lot because in order for us to address those limitations of traditional debt, which often is too expensive, return time is too quick for the enterprises that we care about, or equity, which often requires too unrealistic growth expectations for the enterprises that we're talking about, that we need somewhere in the middle. And so that is really the reason why we're talking about innovative financing, which might also be known as quasi-equity, which shares the traits of both debt and equity. So this conversation will be very much focused on examples of instrument structures that we'll hear from our two speakers, and it will also be focused on the specific needs of crafts-based enterprises, which I hope many of you are representing that today. So I will now introduce my two speakers. I'm not from India, so I'm very terrible at pronouncing Indian names. So I do apologize if I mispronounce your name, which is why I have an English name. I don't even bother asking people to pronounce my Chinese name. So our first speaker is A.B. Chakra, who's the Indian country director of Upaya Ventures. So he is a seasoned impact investment professional with a decade of experience in technologies for emerging markets, and have worked before in other enterprises such as Agro-New-Gen Ventures, FieldGrow, working mainly with early stage enterprises across agri-tech, clean tech, edtech, health tech, etc. So yeah, very pleased to have you join us today. And then Manasi, sorry, I can't pronounce your last name. So I hope that works just with your first name. She's the Indian project manager at Yunus Social Business, managing portfolio and partnerships at Yunus Social Business Fund from out of Bangalore. And so Manasi's been also leading the Social Business Accelerator Program and research and knowledge building initiatives. And previously, she's worked with social businesses, foundations, bilateral donors and governments in India as well as Sub-Saharan Africa. So really great to have you join us today as well. So my first question to the speakers, and we'll also have time for anyone to ask any questions to us later on in the hour. But if you do have kind of questions that you would like just to me to address throughout, then put them in the chat so that we can integrate that into our conversation. The first question is an introductory one. It would just be great to hear from the two speakers about yourselves and your organization's foray into the craft sector. Just really curious what piqued your interest in the sector from an investor's perspective, and whether you can share anything that you feel is unique about the craft sector from a financing perspective. I don't know whether who wants to go first.
Sure, I can.
Yeah, Chakra, over to you.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, thanks for the warm introduction, Bonnie, and thanks, Priya, and the entire 200 million artisans here, the team, for hosting us, and thanks for all joining, and nice to meet everyone. So first, a quick round of introduction on Upaya itself as an organization. We are a Seattle-based and India based impact investment firm. We raise mainly funds from the US and then deploy it in India. We have made 29 investments so far across 5 different sectors: agriculture, arts, crafts, livelihood, waste management, a little bit of clean tech around mobility, and then something around rural manufacturing. So those are the broad areas that we invest in. And our central premises of Upaya lies in creation of employment generation around the underserved community, the low-income communities, or the ultra-poor, what we call. So in that way, we are a little bit sector agnostic. Anywhere we see potential, the livelihood or income improvement can happen for low-income communities, that's the sector that we are interested, and we continue to invest. So that's in a nutshell about Upaya. And naturally, because most of this, at least in the Indian context, the the set of people that we wanted to work with, either coming from the rural backgrounds, and then the 50-50% split naturally arises from agriculture and the artisan sector. So naturally this becomes a big sector for us to focus on and do more enterprise investing around it. That's where the genesis and the origin is. I think for us, the central principle on the artisan or in sector why we are excited about this. I think first, at least the official data says that it's about 70 lakh people in India are artisan and working towards it. But there is, unaccounted data. That's why I think Priya might also have named 200 million. There are 20 crore people who are directly, indirectly, they are there working as artisan. And the beauty of the artisan industry is whenever there is an agricultural market that fluctuates in the same income households, arts and crafts comes into play for that extra income. So in a way, for generation, this acted as a great buffer for people to cover their risk. And we saw that it was breaking down in the last 2-3 decades because of lack of innovations and things like that. We thought this is the time to intervene and do more investing, and for which on two different reasons for us. I think one is India relevance, which is how do you create more employment generation. So if you're able to give more employment in the places where we are living in, we are talking about 1,600 artisan clusters across India in 28 states and 8 union territories. So if you're able to generate employment there, people have no reasons to sort of migrate to cities to look for other jobs. So for us, that's national importance. And the other part, which is of global relevance, which is well packed, which I felt very compelling, is the sustainable fashion and the climate action, which is very well ingrained. And it is, post pandemic, that's been, very hotly contested and debated, very decentralized. Consumers are looking for something very handmade, unique, but also something very sustainable. All goes well with this 1,600 artisanal cluster that India is dealing with. So for us, that's a global relevance. So we thought this is one sector we should be imbibed into it. So that's where our sort of thing comes from. I'll pause here and would like to hear from Manasi.
Well, thank you so much. This research that Priya and I are collaborating on is exactly trying to make that case for investing into the artisan sector, which often is seen as too informal and perhaps too uninteresting and too difficult for investors. And you've just so beautifully made that case. And I love also how you link that to sustainable fashion and climate action. So these are themes definitely we at the research will continue to pick up on. Manasi, over to you.
First of all, yes, of course, thanks Bonnie and Priya for having us here. And I think it's a great topic that we're discussing today. Just to start with a little about Yunus Social Business. So we are a 10-year-old fund and with a headquarter in Germany. However, the India fund is as old as 5 years. And we're still a small fund, I'd like to say, but we've invested in over 15 social businesses, and we have around $3 million USD in our portfolio. What YSB is doing is providing patient and flexible loans to these social businesses. So it is not your typical or your traditional loans, and I'd love to talk about that later. But that's the instrument that we've been providing to the space. And our organization was founded by Professor Yunus, who's also the father of the Grameen banking movement in Bangladesh. So coming from his philosophy, we've kind of stuck to keeping our main offering as flexible loans. And now in terms of what was our foray into the craft sector, I think in late 2018, early 2019, we invested in Rang Sutra and in Sumita Ghosh's team. And I think at that time, we felt like it was a great investment fit for YSB, at 3 levels. Everyone knows it is a solid social impact model. And by the time we decided to invest in them, they already had 3,000 plus artisans working with them. And they were doing equitable wealth generation across its value chain. All the artisans are shareholders in the company. The second thing was that, of course, operating in this unorganized market, Rangasutra had managed to create a robust supply chain, which I think added to the stability of the organization. And I think third, which was also super lucrative for us, was I think the team at Rangasutra had gone ahead and really made some strong industry partnerships and market linkages. So at that time, they were working with Fab India and IKEA, in which they still do. And that again sort of added to the stability and, the say creditworthiness of the model. And, that was the first sort of step we took towards the craft space. And then kind of answering your other two questions on why this sector and what is unique about it. I think a lot of the stuff I think already Chakra covered, but maybe I'll try to add a slightly different perspective is that, I mean, definitely as an impact first investor, we realized that like this space was being driven by enterprises that were trying to bring some sort of a method to the unstructured sort of a market that was there, right? And in doing that, they were able to bring like more income and social parity for artisans. So I think that is definitely what is compelling towards this, for us in this sector, is that anyone who's attempting to organize the unorganized supply chains. And I do feel like by default, this space has a really large potential to, create better livelihood and living conditions for artisans' households. And also, of course, I think we do feel like the models need to be scalable, not just at like a customer level where you're going and like serving, X thousands of customers, but we really look at models which also at the back end are, sustainably growing their production volumes, their artisan incomes, etc. So that's why this sector. And I think what makes it unique or rather compelling is, like I said, just the livelihood generation potential in general is massive, but also the fact that this can be done in a decentralized manner. So we feel like a lot of the problems that we see came out, during the pandemic was just distress migration and then back, all of that. I do feel like really investing in this space has, we can actually solve the problem of, folks moving out from their villages in rural places in India and actually give them a very decent way of living in their own villages. So I think what's great. And I think, of course, like I said, it's not just about a livelihood aspect of it. It really trickles down to a lot of other aspects, right? Like that we see a spillover in education, gender, in general, responsible consumption. And we've even seen enterprises that are now, of course, reporting on like reduction in GHG emissions and are creating better livelihoods for artisans. So I think all in all, it's a really great and a compelling sort of space to, put our bets on.
That's really great. And I think the more investors become interested in it, then the more options we can come up with that will actually meet craft-based entrepreneurs' needs. Which comes to my next question. And I already previewed in the beginning, we felt this topic of alternative financing is so crucial for all enterprises, but especially for craft-based enterprises because of some of the unique nature of these enterprises that you just spoke about, the informality, the seasonality, etc. So it would be great to hear from you what your own definition of alternative financing is in your organization and how does that work for your organization. So if you can give a sense of how you implement alternative financing instruments when you work with entrepreneurs. Maybe Manasi, do you want to start first and then to Chakra?
Sure, I could go ahead. So I think first and foremost, I think, and maybe my hypothesis over here is that historically, like a traditional debt or equity may not have worked for craft entrepreneurs would be essentially because one, I mean, as we've already addressed it, it's a highly unorganized market. And that makes it all the more difficult for investors to also really understand completely what the revenue, what are the revenue generation models over here, right? So I think all in all, unorganized market plus a lack of understanding of what kind of business models work. In general, social businesses usually have a long time to prove, wherein a traditional instrument cannot always like fund that kind of, put that kind of patient money, where it's needed. And I think, of course, all of these factors put together, it really makes it very expensive for any entrepreneur who's just starting out to raise either equity or traditional debt. Either it is expensive monetarily or it would be extremely time consuming for them. So that's why I think it might not have worked. As when it comes to YSP, like I said before, our asset class has been debt. However, it has been very different from traditional debt, right? YSP is funding early to growth stage entrepreneurs, essentially those who are post revenue, but they need this kind of they need certain capital infusion to either get to a Series A or to an expansion mode. So that's the kind of sweet spot we work on. And we also do recognize this gap as the missing middle, where we say that this is where that funding needs to come in for it to scale to a large or a national level, right? And thus, we kind of design our instrument to be a very flexible and a patient loan. We're not taking collaterals, and our interest rates are much lower than most NBFCs would offer in India. And I think what's great about the product that we're doing is we customize it as much as possible to fit the needs of the investees, which could mean looking at flexible moratoriums or sort of structuring it in a way where we do different tranches, etc. So I think customization of every loan is very imperative to why we think, we kind of fit the alternative financing sort of a bucket. And also, I think what's interesting that we've done in the last few years is that once we have invested in a company and gone through the whole process of due diligence, we do have an option to then, we do give them the option to draw upon facilities such as, revenue-based short-term financing or working capital loans. So, for example, if you're on our portfolio and you need a 3-month financing basis invoices, we help you sort of fund that, and that's an option that's always available to any organization in our portfolio. And I think quickly to just make a point on other kind of hybrid structures. So YSP in the past, well, not in India, has deployed a social success note, which is essentially a pay for outcomes kind of instrument. But this was done in Uganda for an enterprise that's generally creating clean drinking water stations for students in schools. However, there have been certain amount of regulatory challenges in deploying SSNs in India, mostly around the FCRA implications and the change in policies of the last couple of years. But I do foresee this space opening up. I think the pandemic led, healthcare has kind of opened up, and in the last 1 year or so, we have seen SSNs being deployed, at least in healthcare. So I think we are definitely keen to see how we want to work on such instruments. And when I would say either interest subventions where we've got a DFI or a multilateral agency subventing our loan, or sort of bringing in some sort of an interest subvention, so that in all, our portfolio company has to pay a much lesser interest, or we're looking for pay for outcome structures as well. I think it's just about it's not an easy road as we see it, because it really needs a lot of stakeholders to come together. And but we do feel like once we have them in the right place and right time, I think there is a market and potential for these instruments to also open up. So yeah.
Great. Yeah, we'll pick up much more to pick up on that, but thank you for just providing the range of financing instruments that you provide. And Chakra, over to you.
I think Manasi covered it well, but I'll try and break it into sort of 3 parts and then add a little more color to it. I think one, the 3 parts are: one is alternate financing, what Upaya is doing, and what is that way out, or the potential and scope. I think from alternate financing perspective, I think for me the nature of alternate financing comes from the fact that where the money need to be sort of used and how it is used. So for example, when you are working in a craft sector, if you're doing a market linkage platform, on a day when we are procuring from artisans, we have to pay to them upfront because they don't have any other financing to sort of manage their own working capital. But somehow people who are aggregators of the platform need financing or able to get that working capital so that they can service the market. So here the nature of expenses such that there is a working capital that is required to do it in terms of getting this manufactured and things like that. There are times that if you're not in a market linkage space, but let's say there are other forms of capital that's required. So for example, if it's a traditional debt, they'll say that, okay, this need not be used for hiring for team. This need not be used for sales and marketing. You cannot use it for legal expenses, things like that, right, which are binding in nature. So though as a promoter, somebody want to use this capital for a certain purpose, they are not allowed to do it. So for me, the nature of expenses decide the alternate financing route, which means that my traditional financing does not allow me to do, and therefore I'm looking for something alternate. And essentially, we are looking at 3-4 things here. One is, in a traditional debt capital world, you're talking about interest rate, whereas in an equity world, you're talking about IRR, returns what you're generating. But invariably, you are looking at some money that need to be returned somehow. So question is, an alternate financing, is somebody breaking that mold for you to make that at a less cost, or the best cost that can be made available to you, considering the risk of the company, that the stage that we are in. That's number one. Second is, actually, I think Manasi touched upon the repayment part, because most of them, the traditional underwriters, be it equity or debt providers, may not understand the sector as such, because seasonality may be a great factor in the arts and crafts world, because there are certain seasons in which the sales peak, let's say during a festive season, and that's when most of the orders gets consumed, and they're followed by a lean season. Now, I cannot expect a company to say that there is a month-on-month repayment. Then it's a traditional lending or traditional giving money and taking it back. But if somebody says that, when you say flexibility, we understand the structure of what the seasonality that the crafts business will undergo. So that's the second part, apart from the repayment. Now, apart from this interest and repayment, I would say the third part is more to do with the collateral, actually, which is the traditional money givers generally ask for if it is a debt capital. Now, question is, okay, is there an alternate financing adequately covers us without that particular risk? Because most of them are first generation entrepreneur, and then are we covering without that, right? So those are the three parts, I would say, apart from the nature of expenses, alternate financing is all geared towards. Now, in Upaya, what we look at is, I think we are also similar to ISB in terms of getting early stage businesses, maybe a tad little earlier than ISB in a view. At least in the accelerator, we are trying to see how we can support most post-revenue company as they are starting with the pilot. Now, we are trying to do more quasi-equity instrument, which gives us flexibility, where entrepreneurs are not getting diluted, but at the same time, able to repay at some point of time, and then still able to get the capital when it is needed. That's what Upaya is trying to do. And apart from that, we are also trying to see if there is any small amount of debt, like I said, which carries not the inherent legacy problem of a traditional debt, but carries the inherent goodness of all equity, and try to support entrepreneurs. So that's a kind of blended thing that we are looking at. As Upaya, we have not looked at blended finance as such, which is outcome-based financing, but that is something coming up in recent times. That's where we are at Upaya is placed. But I think we'll talk about potential little later. I'll pause here.
Great, thank you. I think it's really helpful that you break it down how to look at alternative financing in a practical way, because all of the actual instruments, I mean, there's so many terms like, revenues-based financing, RBF in short, or convertible notes. All these terms can be very confusing for some of the crafts entrepreneurs who don't have a master's degree in finance. So it's helpful that you just break it down very simply. It's about, the interest rate, the repayment, and kind of collateral as like three ways to look at it. And that's also linking to my next question. I see that a lot of entrepreneurs simply are not aware of alternative financing. They're just aware of traditional debt and equity. And that is the reason why they are not pursuing alternative financing. And another barrier I see is also that not a lot of investors are actually providing. I mean, it sounds like simply a lot of work to be crafting those deals, and you really need to understand the enterprise in and out compared to a traditional debt provider or even a traditional VC, you could say. So it would be great just to hear from your perspective. Why do you think not more alternative financing is being offered by investors? It just sounds like it really meets the needs of entrepreneurs. So why don't we see more of this? Chakra, would you like to go first?
Sure. I think I'll just step back in terms of why this is not sort of growing, but more the traditional space, how is it working right now? I think leave alone impact investment space, even if I take a traditional investment venture investing space, the cost of capital is always high when you are at an early stage. So for example, if I have to give you an exact number, if I'm talking about interest rate, people are charging about 18 to 24%. That's how when you are a 1 to 5 year old company. And when you become more stable in nature, actually your interest rate will start coming down, which is, let's say, somewhere between 12 to 14 or 12 to 18. And then over the years, when you are becoming a listed company after 10, 15 years, sometimes your borrowing is only 9% interest rate. This is very ironic, right? Because it has to be other way around, where when I'm in an early stage, when I'm struggling for money, the interest rate has to be pretty low. And then as I grow higher, when I have appetite to pay, I should be high. But unfortunately, fortunately, our banking systems and the venture investing system is not playing out like that, because there is one specific element. There is a reason why this exists, because of the risk that what somebody is underwriting on. So it is heavily weighing on all of this. So when somebody is saying alternate financing, that's the mold that is getting broken first, to say, okay, can a 10-year, 15-year-old company, getting the flexibility and the luxury of that interest rate, can you give to an early stage enterprise which needed the most? Then which means that it's not that risk are gone away, but question is, how do you mitigate around it? That's when all these things, starts playing out. So that's how the whole equation sort of generally sort of plays out, because this will give you context on me answering what Boni was asking as to why this is not growing, if it's such a cool thing, right? Now, the first point, why it has not played out, as rampant as it is because people have not found out enough ways to cover and mitigate the risk. One is the perception, the other is actual. Because when I say actual, people have not seen adequate number of enterprises who have taken loan, paid it, and then grown it. There are a lot of cases actually otherwise, which is people have used soft capital like grants, taken large amount of money with multilateral institution, that anything you can think of, and there are a lot of failed experiments to start with. There is not successful ones that clearly demonstrated that somebody has grown to a 50 crore, 100 crore company by leveraging some of this capital, which means that the onus is just not on entrepreneurs outside, but a lot of you are here. The onus is, how do you get some of this capital that is coming to you, whatever little, it could be mudra loan, it could be, you're borrowing it from NBFC. How can we really, really care for it and really make it, a repayment or, successful closure and the growth, which assures more investors to step into the space, because that's how the microfinance industry in India grew, because a lot of repayment happened, great success rate, and therefore a lot of money started sort of piling up in the sector, which is more than needed. That's another story, but that's how a traditional industry grows anyway, like that. So we are in the cusp of that, I would say, in alternate financing when people are talking about. I think the engine has already started, I would say, because a lot of people wanted to already give this revenue-based loan, bill discounting and all that in online format, which means that they're all gearing up to underwrite just based on the information that an entrepreneur is providing and try to see if that's capital can be secured. So for me, that's one important fundamental factor. Second, I think, like I said, the risk and the mitigation of it is not understood. Apart from the success story is, okay, how deep I understand the craft sector in general, because we are talking about craft. If I talk about food and agri, it's separate. If I talk about waste management, the circular economy, then it is separate. Each sector has a very nuanced understanding. Even craft, we are making it very generic. But if I sit with somebody in Faridabad for metal manufacturing, is very different from somebody who's doing, let's say, toys in Changapatna in Karnataka, right? Each cluster had a very different procurement cycles, manufacturing cycle and selling cycles. So it's very nuanced understanding. If you ask me today, is there somebody like an NBFC, which is only extending loan to craft sector? Answer is no. Can you imagine in a country like India, then there is no service provider who's just targeting this, where 20 crore people's, lives are dependent. So that is the potential, but question is whether the tacit knowledge and whether that risk mitigation mechanism is available. Answer is no. These are the first baby steps that people are taking in, maybe like Yunus and others, Upaya and others are coming in and to build this out, to say that more, more people can sort of join the system and grow this. So those are the two broad reasons, I would say.
Now that's really helpful. And these are, when we're doing these sessions also, I know we've interviewed you already, but to deepen our research, because we would like to come up with really clear recommendations on how to grow alternative financing for the craft sector, in particular in India. And Manasi, anything else to add on, why don't we see more of this? And it might be interesting also if you can share perhaps how YSB is able to provide such patient capital that are collateral free. Like it's your own cost of capital that you also need to consider as an investor.
Absolutely. So maybe just like starting with answering the question that you have, I think what Chakra, I think covered quite well. I think it's the risk aspect that is not understood, which also I mean, alluding to my earlier point, and like, I don't think investors really understand what kind of business models work. How do they work? How do they scale? When will they scale, right? All of these questions. So there are not enough proven examples of it. But like I said, there's no easy answer or a straight answer to say like, why is there a gap for alternative financing or why entrepreneurs are not taking it? While yes, I think what we've established is that there is definitely some sort of a supply gap. That is, there are not enough impact investors who understand the model, craft models, and are sort of contributing that kind of capital to this sector. But also, I do see that there is a bit of a capability gap when it comes to the demand side as well, right? And we did a research last year wherein, you're really trying to understand what are the gaps when it comes to support providers, both financial as well as non-financial. And I think, one, we of course concluded that there is a missing middle of finance that just, is tough to raise the money, to raise money for it. But it's also a capability gap at the entrepreneur level, right? Where most businesses today let's say, even in craft or, livelihood generation are struggling to meet, say standards of investment readiness that impact investors or alternative financiers seek, and which are anyways much more flexible and easier comparable to other investors. So maybe if I were to break it down into two perspectives, I think from an investor level, I think there are a few investors like in Upaya, YSB, or Social Alpha of the world who are willing to invest. But again, I think where, what gets lost is that relevant enterprises don't make it to the funnel or to the radars of these investors. So that being said, I think there is a lot of, government and academic led sort of, incubation and innovation challenges that have sort of bridged the gap and have given these local entrepreneurs more exposure. Like I know Chintan is doing something great with, his organization. So I think that has definitely been a great step because it really gives local entrepreneurs a platform to just, meet investors and get into the, networks. But then again, like I said, there is definitely onus on impact investors to, one, like Chakra said, understand, what kind of models work and how will they work. And second is, actively seek out platforms, that are giving exposure to craft-based entrepreneurs. I think it is the onus lies on us, not just to break out of the circles of, the kind of startups that are based in Bangalore or Bombay or Delhi, but really try and get to know who are the smaller, entrepreneurs doing this. And like I said, really identify innovations from the depths of, the Indian ecosystem. The other point is like at an entrepreneur level, I think mostly the notions on your traditional asset classes is very like, okay, debt is, sort of chastised by loan sharks and like money lenders. So it's always not seen as a favorable investment. And when equity looks, it talks about giving up a lot of the control, right? So I think here there is some onus on entrepreneurs as well to understand how new age alternative financing and asset classes work. In fact, I always say that, investors are very happy, especially impact investors, to talk to entrepreneurs about these things, but there are enough and more resources that are available online. In fact, YSB itself put out a 6-month program for young social entrepreneurs on Coursera, which is absolutely free to access. And I'm happy to put out the link later. But that course makes you understand the brass tacks of, what kind of asset classes exist, how can you finance your social business, how can you set it up. So I think there is a need to also come up to speed. And and then I think, like answering the last question that you had on how we are able to finance our patient loans. I think, Bonnie, maybe I don't have a very clear answer to this, but I would just say that for us, I think we make sure that we are funding organizations that are, like I said, post-revenue, have a predictable cash flow, at least for the next 2 years, right? So because debt is the kind of instrument which needs that kind of predictability. And I think by making those, and then of course working with them to understand how they plan to grow, what are the projections for the next few years, we are able to make a calculated choice to say that, okay, this is a great investment for us. So, I mean, in examples of the kind of revenues we seek, anything above 2.5 crores in INR is what we fund. What we do also ensure is that, they should have predictable cash flows and they're funding it for the right reasons, right? And I would maybe talk a little bit more about that later, but debt is cheaper than maybe equity, and you don't need to dilute, but you also, I think, need to understand very well that when is the right time to raise it. And thus coming back to owners and entrepreneurs to also understand how these asset classes work. So yeah.
Right. And from what I've heard so far from you, back to that point on mitigating risk, is also that you seem to have very close relationship with the enterprise, that you really understand their business models, their cash flow, and that's really, then you can help jump in and customize the instrument based on what they need. And alternative financing often doesn't work if you don't have that close relationship and that ability to iterate throughout the course of the financing. There's a question that's just come through, and time has really just flown by. We only have around 15 minutes left. So there's a question from Renee just about what aspects an organization will need to answer before they approach alternative financing. So that's also similar to my question. How, what should entrepreneurs really think about before deciding whether alternative finance is right for them? Chakra, you first.
Yeah, I'll just try to answer agnostic of alternate impact financing for any financing, actually. Leave alone alternate financing, how do you sort of grow the business? I would say the first thing that people sort of need to really care about is the problem solution fit, which is, okay, is there a need from the consumer end, or if you're dealing with artisan who's your sort of customer, is there a problem at his end, are you sort of trying to solve? Whether that fit, is it getting established? Then the product market fit, which means whether a consumer is willing to pay or not. That's a second tick mark. The third is, I think it's once there is a product market fit, the consumer wanted to pay or the customer wanted to pay, but for the solution, service, product that you're providing, question is it positive unit economics? Do I make something at 8 and sell at 10, or I make something at 8 and sell at 6 rupee, right? That's are we falling on the positive unit economic sides? Because in the day and age when media is more attracted towards a lot of money attraction, there are a lot of money flowing into the company, a lot of companies bleeding in losses, I think the whole positive unit economics as a point is completely sort of forgotten. So the positive unit economics on any day, whether any kind of market changes surrounding you, but the business is always going to be in a good shape. That's the third element somebody wanted to sort of clearly come out and say that I'm doing something, but it is giving me positive gross margin to start with, and then overall how the company will become sustainable. If at least these three things are there to start with, then I think as an entity, one will be sort of attractive to any sort of investment, leave alone alternate impact financing. The fourth element, I think this is more context specific because of the arts and crafts sector, where the entry barrier is very hard to come by. It's not to say that you have an entry barrier in the business on day one, but question is, over a period of 3 year, 5 year, can you build something? Can you build something of that sort, either through your technology or a process or any of your methods that you're deploying? Can there be an entry barrier amongst your competitors? Can you sort of build out as a fourth point, I would say, because in arts sector, just because of the sheer numbers, what is happening is there are a lot of what I call it, satellite companies which are formed in each of these places. Now, when somebody looks at it from investment or from any capital perspective, people keep asking, okay, how this is going to grow over others, vis-a-vis others. So that entry barrier point is something has to be sort of thought of from day one, though somebody may not have it on there. And fifth element, which is more, I would say, agnostic of all this 4 point, leave the whole investment piece completely aside and say, how can you sort of build the organization without taking any capital? Now, this is a curious thing, right? I mean, how do you build a company without taking money? But that's how Indian entrepreneurs have always built over the last 50, 60 years before even venture investing or debt capital opened up, right? Now, question is, for example, there are companies I've seen who wanted to make product, but started making revenue through consulting. Because of the skill set that they possess, and the consulting revenue, whatever that they earn, was used as a reserves and surplus to create their own product without even getting grant capital to start with, right? Now, question is, can you think of something like that? Of course, the gestation period is going to be long. Let's say if somebody has a capital today, I can right away start building it. Whereas somebody who's dependent on consulting revenue or other sources of revenue may take 2 years later to build that out. But still, because the industry is very competitive in terms of, let's say you come across 1,000 plus company and in turn you're going to fund only 10, that's the best backup one can have and continue to sort of build. So for me, these are the 5 points that encompasses on Rini's question on what somebody should need to sort of take care of.
Yeah, that's really helpful as a checklist, I think, for entrepreneurs when they think about if they do want to raise finance, what they should be doing. And Chakra, your last point about building a business that doesn't require financing, that was also an advice from the last session, that actually financing, ideally the best form of financing is actually money from your customers. So that was what was said. So I guess, Manasi, if you have anything else to add, and I think it will be particularly interesting, I'm sure you come across so many entrepreneurs all the time, like you only have a set amount of money that you could actually allocate. So who or what type, the entrepreneurs, what are some of the characteristics that you feel are the best fit for alternative financing?
Sure, absolutely. So I think, what really, I think one of my entrepreneurs come to us, I think one question we definitely ask them is like, we try to understand their business models, right? I think what is important for us is that they have very clear revenue streams. They have a well thought out business plan that is logical growth projections over years, and that they have a great team to support this. Those are, I think, some of the things that are extremely lenses that are critical to us as an investor. And also, I think more importantly, really having a clear answer to the question is like, one, what type of funding do they need and how do they plan to use it? And this doesn't have to be a macro allocation of funds, like 10% goes in marketing, 20% in capex, etc. But I think it's always good to see when they have appropriate projections for the target asset class that they're trying to raise, right? For example, whether it's equity or debt. So I think that's important. And I think, so those are the things I think for YSP that matter a lot, other than, of course, like I mentioned, having very predictable cash flows and a good, all that ties up to a great business model. I think a couple of points that I do want to add to Rene's question. If you are sort of looking at alternative financing, I think first and foremost, I think really just do your research super well on who are these impact investors that are really going to support your vision and your idea, and at what stage are they investing, right? We often get a lot of folks we do have to say no to because either it doesn't fit our vision or they are maybe approaching us, a stage which is a little too early. So I think it's important to do that because they are going to be your partners in growth. So make sure you do your research and approach investors who have the same vision or a complementary vision as you. And I think third, at some level, try to identify the right fit of capital for you, right? We've spoken about 3 asset classes. Even in alternative financing, these pretty much are the same, but just at maybe slightly more flexible terms. So when we look at equity, I think, in case when you have an innovation-driven model and you need funding to sort of, you're not certain of when you're going to get the returns, look for equity because it's long-term commitment, use it to finance your tech development, your team hiring, etc. Look at debt when you're an execution-driven model. You have predictable cash flows, and you need it to finance working cap or capex sort of things, right? And last is grant is business models, who can prove depth and the breadth of impact. You use it to finance your research and development, your impact capacity building, any other pilots or projects that you want to do to test out something. So I think that's why grant works really well. And I think the last but not the least is just try and network with a lot more entrepreneurs who are doing the same work as you. I think not only will you learn from their journeys of fundraising, but it's, I think in, peer-to-peer referrals are also a great way of working through or navigating through this fundraising cycle.
That's really great. And that's actually a good segue for us to promote our next session in the series, which is directly hearing from the entrepreneurs themselves and their fundraising journey. So again, it's next Thursday at the same time that Priya will be hosting. I guess, I don't know if there was just one question about kind of relevant parameters, like what are some of the financial KPIs, I suppose, that Chakra and Manasi you look at. So Renee asked whether turnover or age of company are more relevant. I don't know if you have a direct response to that quickly before we wrap up.
Yeah. So in terms of, I think both of them are in some level irrelevant for me. The reason why I'm saying that is, for me, adoption curve matters the most of the customers. One example could be online, all the medical platform, the teleconsulting with doctors. Before pandemic, I looked at company we have invested in, some of them from my pharma companies and all that. So when we go and say that, do you want to consult a doctor through online? From most of them, answer was no. Come pandemic, what is the result? Everybody want to now see doctor only in online. So question is, you have the positive economics even before the pandemic, the company may have, but the adoption is not that great because people who are not able to sort of willing to move around, maybe sitting in Kolkata, somewhere in Nadia district in West Bengal, but cannot come to Narayana Hridayalaya in Bangalore. They want to consult because they don't want to spend on airfare, train fare, and said, okay, I'm happy to do this 1,500, 2,000 rupee consulting. It was not just breaking beyond that. Now, once the pandemic sort of goes through, invariably you are searching for a platform where you can consult doctor, and invariably you want to pay any amount. It's not even thinking of, okay, it's a teleconsulting, I'll pay less. There is no negotiation, right? For me, that's the cusp of adoption, which tells that now I can grow fast as a company. And that's when you should think of where will I get investment to grow further. So now inwardly looking in artisan, your own businesses, you start searching where is the adoption curve for growth lies in. And the time and moment is what for me signifies the capital growth.
Great, thank you. And Manasi, coming to you for another question, which is just whether practical tools you can advise entrepreneurs to arrive at product market fit and measuring social and environmental impact as well.
Right, absolutely. So I think there are a lot of great resources that are available online, and maybe what I would do is I think I'll maybe talk about measuring your environmental and social impact. I think one great way to start is if you have a set of investors that you think aligned to your vision. I think it's good to start from there and see the kind of indicators or the SDGs that they are looking at. That's always a good North Star to have, and then sort of go back and see where do you stand over there. what we do with our sort of our cohort and accelerators, we work with a few frameworks. So I think one is a theory of change framework. And that's something, if you look at it, it's very easily available online. I think it's a great tool to really, really start thinking about what is the result, and what is the result of my actions, right? If I'm going to be working with these artisans, am I going to immediately lead to income increase, or am I immediately leading to skill increase? And so it really helps you map this out. So I'm going to actually put down a lot of this in the chat. So theory of change is one. The other is, more around when we're putting down our metrics. At both, I know for a fact that Upaya and YSB, we follow the IMP framework, which is also called the impact management project. So here it basically asks you sort of, 5 questions, right? The IMP elements essentially. So it really asks, why are you doing this impact, for example, and, what are the kind of outcomes you're going to achieve? Again, going to link that below. These are, so for example, what it does is at a level where you've sort of understood what your impact metrics or impact direction is going to be, it really asks you questions on, what are you trying to do? Like, what are the kind of outcomes and the, more measurable things that you're going to try and achieve? Then it is the who aspect, like the stakeholder, geography, what is your baseline? How much, at what kind of scale do you want to create? Contribution is looking at it from the depth and the duration that you want to, make this change. And then of course, it helps you account for risk. So there are a lot of these free tools available. And I will link those up. Even for product market fit, in fact, there is something called the Board of Innovation. So check that out. It's really good. It has a lot of free resources available. Maybe that should help you out. And of course,
Thank you so much. Really great advice from our 2 seasoned investors. And you've also given lots of great tips for us thinking about the research, what some of the sector gaps are that need to be addressed from a financing perspective. But definitely, we saw a lot of interest in today's call. I think with more people joining today than last session, because there's definitely a lot of interest in alternative financing. So because of time, I'll wrap up now and just want to thank the 2 panelists for all your great answers. We'll be documenting all this. Of course, we'll have a video to share out from today, but also, as I mentioned, it will go into our research and maybe different blogs that we can socialize further this concept of alternative financing and demystify these challenging concepts for entrepreneurs. Handing back over to Priya to close us out.
Thank you so much, Bonnie. And thank you so much, Chakra, Manasi, really great conversation. And thank you to all our participants for asking the questions and sharing, your doubts. Just very quickly, our first blast of the survey has gone out to about 500 enterprises. If you're one of those enterprises, and if you have received an email from 200 million artisans, I would encourage you to please fill out the survey. It's critical that we understand what your needs are and what your challenges are. And if you haven't got an email from us, please reach out to hello@200millionartisans.org and we will send you a link. Thanks again. And hopefully we will see all of you and more others in the next session. Thanks again and have a good day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Priya,
Thanks, everyone.
Bonnie,
All the
Chakra.
best.